Hey everybody, it's Ted Drozdowski, Senior Editor at Premier Guitar, and here we are for another installment of Road Dog, my monthly conversation about reflecting on 30 years on the road and various tips for touring and things like that. I'm going to do a slightly different one this time, and I think of this one as kind of secondhand stories. I'm going to talk somewhat about stories that other musicians have told me while I've been hanging in different places along the road. Also, I've also been a music journalist for a long time. In the late 70s when I was in college, I started writing about music, and shortly thereafter I started playing in bands. So I've kind of led this double life, and I can cross the line between journalist and musician, and it's just led to some pretty interesting experiences and perspective, and it's given me a lot of insight into the creative process, which is one of the things that I really love talking to other musicians about and getting to know them, you know. I think the more you know about a person's background and the more you get to know about them personally, you get to know how their internal wiring reflects the art that they make externally. Anyway, before I drift too far off on this double life has put me in some pretty cool places. I've opened for some awesome bands like the Gang of Four and X and Catherine Wheel and R.L. Burnside. As a musician and as a journalist, I've just had some cool experiences, like going to England and spending a week in Robert Fripp's ancestral village of Cranbourne, Dorset, or hanging out in England with a cool rock band and Polygram's credit card in our hip pocket back in the days when they had junkets. I was also along for the Monsters of Rock tour, the original one in 1988 for a couple of days, and Van Halen, Dokken, Scorpions, Kingdom Come, and Metallica were on that tour, and that's the first place where I met the guys from Metallica, who I think are terrific human beings. And I have to say, Scorpions were so much fun to hang out with. Rudolf Schenker is a prince among men, and one of the most genuinely funny humans I have ever met. I really have enjoyed every minute I spent with Rudolf over the years. Anyway, later that year, I found myself in Amsterdam with Metallica when they were concluding a European tour for And Justice for All. And that was when the band was known as Alcoholica and still had a Jaeger chiller backstage in their rider. Or maybe it actually traveled with them. All I know is there was a Jaeger chiller backstage and we used it. But that was a pretty wild stretch, being in Amsterdam with Metallica, you know, the land of lots of beer and legal weed. But they were great guys. I will always respect them for their candor and genuineness. You know, we had some wonderful conversations. But the end of tour party was amazing. They rented out an entire bar in this little village, pulled all the bottles off the wall, and shared them with everybody. I mean, you know, Kirk Hammett's pouring me drinks. It's pretty awesome. And people were smoking joints the size of Zeppelins. The downside was that I had to fly back the next day. And, well, the next day wasn't really the next day. I had to fly back straight from the party. And there was a baby crying in the seat right in front of me all the way from Amsterdam to JFK. And I never got any sleep. And as I'm flying, my buzz evolves into a hangover, you know, and finally I get off the plane at JFK and, man, I'm just kind of like staggering down the walkway. Then I realize where I've just been. So I reek of weed. So I'm, you know, trying to brush off my my pants cuffs and checking my pockets to make sure there's nothing improper in there. And I get to customs, and the customs guy is like, where have you been? I'm like, Amsterdam. Business or pleasure? Business. What's your business? I'm a journalist. What were you doing there? I was doing a feature on Metallica. And he looked at me and I'm like, man, you know, here I'm dressed all in black. I've got a Metallica t-shirt on and a pair of boots. I've got a motorcycle jacket. I'm like, this guy is going to frisk the hell out of me. I'll be lucky if I don't get a cavity search. And he just goes, all right, go through. So, I don't know. Pretty lucky. Anyway, there's a couple of stories I've heard from other artists, and that's where the secondhand stories part comes from, that I wanted to share with you today. I've heard, like, many, many, many. But in the 90s, I was completely captivated by the sound that Fat Possum Records started putting out. You know, I'd been a rock guy, really, but a big blues fan. But in the late 90s, they started putting out these modern electric juke joint blues albums that I completely fell in love with. So I started traveling to Mississippi a lot, as a musician and as a journalist, and I ended up being befriended by three people who became really cornerstones in how I view life, but also in terms of music, and that was Jesse May Hemphill, R.L. Burnside, and Junior Kimbrough. And my wife Lori and I became especially close to R.L., so we spent a lot of time together. So I was also a conduit for opening up the Boston market for those guys, and the band that my wife Lori and I were in at the time, Vision Thing, was doing a fair amount of touring. So we would cross paths with RL, or we'd see him in Mississippi, or he'd come to Boston to play, and we'd hang out. And one night, when they had a night off, we invited them over to our house. Now, Lori and I had just had a debate, literally the day before, about my collection of films, because in that film is an Amos and Andy movie called Check and Double Check. And just in case you're not familiar with Amos and Andy, they are racist as all hell. It's basically these two white guys in blackface putting on, you know, deep Southern African American accents and speaking in malapropisms and stuff. And it's just weirdness. And I wanted to keep it because, you know, naive as I was at the time, I thought, well, 5 or 10 years from now, there are kids who aren't even going to believe this stuff happened. Little did I know. But anyway, I wanted to kind of keep it as an artifact. Plus, Duke Ellington and his orchestra are in the film, too, and they're pretty interesting, you know, to see in the late 1930s. At any rate, we were debated whether or not to throw this thing, and we decided to keep it. So RL comes over for dinner with his band the next day, and we're all hanging out. It's after dinner. I'm like, RL, what do you want to do? You want to play some music? You want to play some records? You want to watch a movie? And he goes, oh, I definitely want to watch a movie. And he goes through this stack of maybe 200 titles, because I'm a movie freak. And he pulls out Amos and Andy, check and double check. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, watching a super racist-y movie with R.L. Burnside. This is going to be more than a little awkward. But, you know, right from the very first joke, which is, I think, Amos looks over and Andy goes, Amos, I think I'm going to go home and unlax, you know, in this really thick accent. And R.L. just starts to roar. And he laughs his ass off through this whole movie. It's only an hour long, but he's just laughing through the whole thing. And at the end, I'm like, R.L., so you like Amos and Andy? You know? And he's like, oh yeah, when I was a boy, me and my friends would save up and we'd take our money and we'd drive our bikes to Memphis, which is like 30 miles. We'd drive on our bikes to Memphis when the new Amos and Andy movie was there. And we'd go see the movie, we'd have a hamburger and a Coca-Cola, and we'd drive back at night. And then at night, when we saw headlights on the road, we would throw our bicycles into the ditch and we'd jump into the bushes and hide because of night riders. So here is this sweet remembrance of R.L. As a kid, going to see these movies that he loved, even though they were crazy racist movies. And then at the end, coming home and having to deal with racism and fear on the way home because of night riders. To me, it was just this very strange slice of American life. And it inspired a song that I wrote called R.L. Burnside's Slight Return. If you punch in my name and my band Sysmen and R.L. Burnside's Slight Return on YouTube, you'll get a chance to hear this song. But it's basically a song that recounts that evening with R.L. and recounts this story and and also just as a little tribute, because I wish that guy was still here, man. He was a big part of my life. Another really interesting story I've heard, and again, there's like a stack of them, but this one I've always cherished because it was just delivered in such a beautiful fashion by a man who was a really beatific character, Roy Buchanan, the great roots guitar player. I had talked to Roy a couple times before and met him, and I went to see him at a club in Cambridge, Massachusetts when I was living up there called Jonathan Swift's. And Roy put in this brilliant incendiary set, as always, just dialing in this stuff from another space. And we started chatting afterwards, and I started to ask him about his like pinch harmonics and stuff, and how he had his amps, you know, rewired if he did, and you know, other technique-y things. And then I sort of asked him this question about where he gets his ideas from while he's playing. Does he feel like he's channeling something almost from another plane or another planet? And he said, yeah, and this idea seemed to excite Roy. So he invited me back to his hotel to hang out and have some coffee and talk about this some more. So he invites me back, and we go to the lobby of his hotel where the coffee machine is, and we hang out on the couch. He's got that beautiful battered old Telecaster that he used to play on his lap, you know. And, you know, he was a very sweet man, blue eyes, spoke very gently and quietly, you know. Really a complex character who battled with depression, but this night he was just in a very relaxed, loquacious mode, and he goes, man, I'd like to tell you about the time that the ghost of Jimi Hendrix saved my life. I'm like, yeah, man, tell me about the time the ghost of Jimi Hendrix saved your life. I really want to hear this story. And Roy said he was at a very low ebb. He was seriously hooked on some drugs and pills, and he was drinking too much, and he thought he was going to die. And he was playing a gig in the D.C. area. And afterwards, these college kids came up, and they're like, Roy, man, we really loved your playing, and they could tell that he was not well. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, well, I'm feeling really sick. I've got a lot of problems, and I think I might die. And they said, oh, man, no, we know what'll fix you up. Why don't you come home with us? So he goes, okay. Oddly enough, doesn't know these guys, but that's Roy. He goes, okay. So he goes home with them, and they take him to their off-campus apartment. And they gave him a tab of acid. Roy had never done LSD before, so he takes this tab of acid. And as the acid kicks in, he feels really relaxed. They're listening to music. He starts seeing colors. And then everything in the room disappears. And in front of him, Roy sees Jimi Hendrix. The ghost of Jimi Hendrix appears to Roy. And the ghost of Jimi Hendrix says, Roy, you're on a bad path, man. You really have to straighten this stuff out. And Roy's like, I know, Jimmy, I know. And he's just quietly listening. And Jimmy says, Roy, I'm going to tell you what, man. You just kind of relax and listen to the music and just, quit doing all these drugs and stuff, and everything is going to be okay. Now, meanwhile, he's tripping his brains out, of course. But he's like, everything's going to be okay. So Roy said that after Jimmy spoke to him and after he sobered up, from being high the next day, he just decided he wasn't going to drink or do drugs anymore. And that was how he felt that Jimi Hendrix had appeared to him while tripping on acid and saved his life. Those are the kind of stories you hear when you get to hang out with folks long enough, or when you strike the right chord with them, and it's kind of a beautiful thing. It makes life a lot more rich and enjoyable. And I hope you like some of those. Maybe you could tell me who appeared to you the last time you were tripping on acid. Or, not that we condone that, of course, here at Premier Guitar. But anyway, if you have any stories to share, or any more questions or anything, just drop a line. Always happy to respond. Always happy to hear from you. And thanks for tuning in for another episode of Road Dogs. Peace.